Welcome back. I am Corey Cantrell. I am a member of the League of Women Voters, and I thank you for joining us tonight. We are going to be moving on to the next portion of our forum with the Iowa State House candidates for District 13 and District 14. We are not going to be having the District 5 and District 6 candidates here because Tom Jennery and Jacob Bosman are both running unopposed. So we are going to concentrate on those contested elections that we have. So joining us now for District 13 are Republican Ernest Gigaroa and Democrat Chris Hall. And gentlemen, we will be having each of you make an opening statement of 60 seconds. We will then be turning to our panelists who will be asking you questions. You will each get a chance to answer each question, and we'll alternate who gets to go first. Serving as our panelists tonight are Kristen Barnes, who's a Western Iowa Tech Community College student in the mass media program, Flora Lee from the League of Women Voters, and Hannah Adamson from KCAU 9 News. So thank you all for being here and joining us as panelists, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here and joining us for our forum, and thank you most of all for your willingness to serve our community. So, Mr. Hall, we're going to start with you and let you have 60 seconds for an opening statement.
Very good. Well, thank you especially to our hosts tonight and to the viewers at home. My name's Chris Hall. I'm a state representative here in Sioux City. I grew up here in Sioux City. I live and work here. Throughout the last several years, it has been one of the most great privileges of my life to be able to visit with some of the voters in our district on their doorstep and hopefully hear either how their day has gone well or how I might be able to help improve it. People are looking for leaders and elected officials with integrity, right now more so than ever. And we know that that integrity represents something important and something that's harder and harder to find in politics. For me, it means that the voters of our district, regardless of whether they are a Republican, Democrat, or independent, are equally represented at the Capitol. My job is to represent this community, to fight hard for the victories that we so desperately need, and to make sure that we also deliver results. I'm not long-winded on those victories, but I am eager to discuss the issues. I'm grateful to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Gigaroa.
Well, my name is Ernest Gigaroa. I was born here in Sioux City, served in the military for a time, so I was gone and then come back. I work here in Sioux City, and I'm running for the Iowa House. I have a lot of different views than a lot of people do, but we'll see if we can't get those across to you folks.
Thank you. We're going to start with Ms. Adamson, and Ms. Adamson, if you would please direct your first question to Mr. Gigaroa.
Mr. Gigaroa, what is the most pressing issue in your district, and how would you work to remedy that if elected?
I noticed a lot of the people in the district are, at least, well, the area that I live in are lower income people. They are living off Social Security, some of them are retired. And I'd like to see about getting more funding for those people.
Thank you. Mr. Hall.
I honestly, I'm glad to have this opportunity to visit with voters and also stand next to my opponent. I appreciate his answer because I think it's one of the more pressing topics in Sioux City in our community. Incomes have been stagnant, and we also know that poverty across the state, both in urban metro areas and in rural areas, is a real thing. It's something that is creating an additional barrier to our children. It's something that has forced many families to work more than one job at a time. We need to work to make sure that incomes are increased in the state, and we have many different levers available to us at the state level to help with that, whether it's school funding, whether it's a minimum wage increase, or working with employers to provide them with the kind of employees they'll need for the coming years.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, if you would please direct your first question to Mr. Hall.
Since we're talking money, in the Journal today, the Sioux City Journal, it was reported that the state of Iowa has approximately $306 million surplus in the state budget. And last year's state budget surplus was $289 million. the additional dollars, is that due to increased revenue, budget cuts, or federal money for COVID? Or is it a combination of these items? Please explain, and how, if there's a surplus, if both of you have spoken about this, how would you use them to address those issues that you've spoken about?
Well, there's a lot packaged into that question, so I'll
I
do my
know.
best. But the best way to answer it is, right now, it's very difficult to know, and it's likely that a number of different factors help to create that budget surplus. The biggest challenge we have right now in state government and as appropriators in state government is to actually have transparency and a level of clarity with the governor's office on how tax dollars are being spent. More than $4 billion have come into our state from the federal government, and right now it's very unclear how the governor has chosen to spend them. We've seen in recent weeks that she has utilized some of those dollars to pay for her staff salaries, even though the legislature had already appropriated funds for those salaries. So greater transparency is going to help us understand where the dollars have been shifted or where maybe some federal dollars have been used to plug gaps. Given there is a surplus, and if I were to be the one writing the budget next year, my hope would be that we can invest in places that make a real difference on the ground for working families and the people who are going through this public health and economic crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Jigaroa?
Well, if there's a surplus, I would take and divvy the money out to the working class people as needed. And yeah, just basically divvy it out to the working class people because they're the ones that need it the most at the moment. Because I know there's a lot of families that are struggling.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Barnes, would you please direct your first question to Mr. Jigaroa?
Mr. Jigaroa, access to affordable quality childcare has been cited as a significant constraint on Iowa's economy. What actions should the legislator take to address this problem?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. Access to affordable quality childcare has been cited as a significant constraint on Iowa's economy. What actions should the legislature take to address this problem?
Try and find more funding. Maybe we can get more funding from the federal government to fund more programs to help the people.
Thank
That would be
you.
it.
Great. Mr. Hall?
Childcare is a pressing issue for the state, and it's one that thankfully has received some bipartisan attention in the last year or so. The legislature, before we had to hit the pause button this past March, had already dug in and was really looking to find some creative solutions to help create more childcare access in the state. We discussed grants that could help build new infrastructure, especially in rural communities, so that they have additional childcare slots available to them. And we also talked about giving state funds some additional investment to make sure that those currently experiencing the childcare cliff, where subsidies drop off and actually hinder people from choosing to make more money or pursue a career advancement. We have great ideas that are out there, but unfortunately the legislature was cut short due to COVID this year. And my hope is that because these bipartisan ideas have come about and been discussed and hopefully well thought through, we can begin from that starting point again next year, hopefully with a better budget.
Thank you. Ms. Adamson, will you please direct your question to Mr. Hall?
Mr. Hall, COVID-19 has changed how many Iowa schools are operating this year. Do you think school districts have autonomy to make the best decisions regarding health protocols? And if not, should they have more, or should they need to meet certain criteria put forth by the state?
Our school districts, our educators, and parents who are sending their children to school have been put in a remarkably difficult spot. First, our school districts were encouraged to come up with a plan. After the governor traveled to Washington, D.C. and visited with President Trump, she came back to our state and told those school districts their plans were no longer valid and they had to go back to the drawing board. The result has been that they are working as hard as they can and the best they can with fewer resources from the state and with harder decisions to ultimately make to keep children and teachers safe. I think that we need to see greater leadership and more collaboration. We need to trust in our local governments to make good decisions because the people here at the local level are most in tune with their community. We need to stop what the governor has done, which is so often interrupting local governments from doing what they know is best.
Thank you. Mr. Jigaroa?
Well, as far as the schools go, I believe that the school system should make the call on whether or not the children are able to come back, because they're going to know how many kids are sick, how many kids are not. They're going to know better than the governor's office or anybody in Washington, D.C., what's going on in their community. So I believe that they should be the ones to make the call.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, would you please direct your next question to Mr. Jigaroa?
In 2017, the Iowa legislature changed Iowa's 40-year-old collective bargaining law. Please share your thoughts on those changes and whether or not you would work to restore the bargaining rights, collective bargaining rights.
I sat down last night and was reading through that law and was just shaking my head. It's horrible, okay? Just plain and simple. My dad was union for 47 years, and I don't see how they could do that to the people that are working in packing houses, iron plants, places like that depend upon the union to stand up for them. So yeah, there's some big changes need to be done to that.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
My hope is that if Democrats retake the Iowa House, restoration of collective bargaining rights could actually be House File 1 in the first bill introduced in that chamber. There's a phrase that I love, and it talks about the value of what we put into our daily life and our work. And it's second only to our love, our labor is the most sacred thing that we have to give. The elimination of collective bargaining rights in 2017 was the wrong direction to take this state. It has made it harder for teachers and for public employees and people who often go into these professions looking to make a difference and a positive impact in their community. Rather than make their life more difficult and the ability for them to provide for their families harder, we need to reward people who are looking to go into public service.
Thank you. Ms. Barnes, would you please direct your next question to Mr. Hall?
Mr. Hall, how important do you feel career and tech education is for the young people and non-traditional learners in the state?
I think it's extremely important. I've been glad to see the state begin investing in collaboration between high schools and higher education, and also high schools and employers. College and a four-year degree isn't for everybody, and vocational professions in so many different corners of this state are the ones that are earning good money and providing for their families in a way that's going to sustain itself for many years to come. We need to encourage young people to look at the trades as a viable option and something that they can pursue if they are interested. And we also need to make sure that it's financially viable for them to choose that, whether it's an apprenticeship or some on-the-job training that may initially defer earnings, but in the long run provide a great earning for them as an individual and also for our communities.
Thank you. Mr. Jigaroa?
Well, I'm actually a product of the Western Iowa Tech College twice. I attended the body shop class. I went out into the world, worked at a body shop, worked at a truck shop, turned a wrench for many, many years. Then I got laid off, came back to college, got an associate's degree in police science from Western Iowa Tech. So I do believe in education. My children will tell you that because I gripe in every last one of them. That you are going to go to college. I don't care what you're going to college for. You can go to college to bake a cake, but you are going to college. So I'm wholeheartedly for it, college, education.
That sounds so familiar. Sorry. Ms. Adamson, will you please direct your next question to Mr. Jigaroa?
Well, Mr. Jigaroa, going off of Kristen's question, in what other ways would you plan to bring in and retain a younger workforce within your district?
One way to do that is, I know they used to have Job Training Partnership Act, which was bringing children in They were teaching them a skill, and then they were taking them out into the workforce at different job locations and having them work on the job. Something like that would be just fantastic still.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
Outside of the legislature, I work as a grant writer and have the fun of occasionally digging in deep on statistics. And one of the more interesting facts that is out there about younger workers and the next generation of our workforce is how much they value quality of life. And I think it's one of the directions that Sioux City has really, at a local level, pursued strong over the last 10 years, and the state has certainly helped to leverage dollars and bring them to our community to improve quality of life. But younger workers are looking for not only who is cutting their paycheck, but also how they're spending their dollars and their time outside of work. We need to talk about investing in parks and trails, hunting and fishing and recreation, and we need to make sure that families have good options in how they spend their time outside of work and on the weekend as well.
Thank you. Ms. Lee, would you please direct your next question to Mr. Hall?
Okay. Would you support the expansion of Iowa's bottle bill to include additional containers and/or increase in return fees to encourage recycling and environmental programs?
I would, in part because you can look at the track record of how successful Iowa's bottle bill has been. Initially, when it was passed by a Democratic legislature and a Republican governor, it was one of the first models in the country that really looked at getting litter off of our roadways and hopefully creating a system that helped preserve the environment. We know that now there are far more plastic bottles and plastic containers that are out there in production and in consumption than there were when the law was created. And I think that broadening its applicability to plastic containers and a few other things might make sense. We want to keep our state beautiful, and we have a model that has worked, so why not build from it?
Thank you. Mr. Jigaroa?
I'm going to show my age here a little bit. I do remember what it looked like along the highway before the bottle return. And it was horrible. And yes, I'm wholeheartedly for expanding it to plastic bags, plastic bottles, whatever we can do to get the trash out of the ditch. Because it looked horrible before. I can honestly tell you, because I've saw it.
Thank you. Ms. Barnes, would you please direct your next question to Mr. Jigaroa?
Mr. Jigaroa, enrollment at four-year universities regionally and nationally remains steady, while enrollment at community colleges in Iowa and nationally went down this fall. What actions will you take to encourage more enrollment at Iowa community colleges?
Looking at the colleges, trying to give the kids more things to do around the college campus, trying to get them courses that they are actually wanting to take. Things like that is what I would look for trying to do.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
The two things that factor most heavily into whether community college enrollment is finding success is flexibility for the student so that they can attend classes in a form that fits with them if they are continuing to work or if they're raising children outside of the degree that they're looking to get. The second factor is cost, and both of those are a direct product of whether the state and locals are investing in the community college. The state originally had a three-tier funding stream that was made for community colleges: a third the state, a third the student, and a third local. And the pieces that have come out of balance are especially more burden placed on the student and also less burden that is coming from the local environment. I think that looking at that original funding formula and trying to rebalance it and get it back to a place that it was originally intended is a good place for us to start.
Thank you. Ms. Adamson, will you please direct your next question to Mr. Hall?
Well, Mr. Hall, COVID-19 has impacted small businesses and nonprofits across Iowa. If elected, how would you work to bring additional relief to those affected businesses and nonprofits in your district?
Well, I think there's no silver bullet with this thing, and that's one of the most challenging aspects. We know that there are ways that we can hopefully remedy this and bring it to a close, but the economy's not going to recover until we get our hands on the virus itself. And so the state needs to be mindful of, first, the public health effort and ways that we are helping both set a bar of expectation for the public and how they keep themselves and their families and others safe in our communities. But second, we have the robust and really once in a decade, once every 25 years or generation moment where we are flush with cash from the federal government that is first intended to help with the public health effort and second, the economic recovery. I believe that many of the ways the governor has chosen to spend and allocate those dollars are unfortunately helping people within her own network and creating fewer opportunities or good use that could be made by either our frontline workers, those in the public education and healthcare systems, and ultimately small business and nonprofit who need it at the back end.
Thank you. Mr. Jigaroa?
As far as helping out the small businesses, like that slush fund that's extra money, pry it from their hands or whatever you would have to do to get it to the people that actually need it. And get rid of the COVID as quick as we can. I know that's going to take time. I know I've watched the news myself and saw where they were saying, oh, well, it'll go away with summer. Well, summer's come and gone now. So now what are we going to do? I think they just need to regroup, figure out what the best plan of action is, get rid of the virus, and then the businesses and the people will be able to go out and spend money again, and then we'll be better.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So, Ms. Lee, would you please direct your question to Mr. Jigaroa?
Mr. Jigaroa, there's a growing concern among public employees, teachers, city workers, state workers, that IPERS is being chipped away. And despite the data that shows that IPERS is solid and solvent, there's still concerns from these folks because there's talk in Des Moines about IPERS being chipped away. What's your stance on IPERS, and would you support IPERS and any changes in IPERS?
I would, well, first of all, I myself am a state employee for the state of Nebraska. And I can tell you right now, if somebody touched my nippers, I would go after them wholeheartedly. Nobody should touch another person's retirement fund. It should be left exactly where it is, not used for anything else, because I've seen it time and time again where people have dove into that, took some money out. Well, we need this here, we need that there. No. Leave it for what its intended purpose is for, the retirement of the employees of the state of Iowa.
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
I would fight and have fought tooth and nail to protect IPERS the same way that I did to protect our collective bargaining laws. I think that, as you mentioned, it is a system that is financially solvent. We know that it is going to be available and financially sustainable for those employees to continue to invest in and to continue to draw off in their golden years. That's something that we need to protect because we know that people are also leaving many rural corners of our state and moving to urban areas. One of the most significant economic drivers in rural Iowa is IPERS, because in those communities you have a school district, you may have had a public hospital, you may have had public safety and DOT workers, frankly, who are out there fixing the roads and making that community run. And we need to make sure that those people have something that they can count on once they retire.
Thank you. We will now begin our closing statements, and since Mr. Hall went first on the opening statements, Mr. Jigaroa, we will give you the first closing statement. You have 60 seconds.
Wow, 60 seconds. Well, hopefully I will be elected by the good people of District 14, had brain there for a second. But, and then I'll be able to go and get some of the changes done in Des Moines that need to be done and get IPERS straightened out, the union stuff straightened out, and schools and the COVID stuff, and get everything taken care of at some point in time. Nobody knows when it's going to end. We'll just have to take it as it comes. So,
Thank you. Mr. Hall?
Thank you again for the opportunity to hopefully visit and reach some of our voters here at home. My job is to represent this community, and I'm proud of the job that I've done over the last several years. I believe that my track record shows somebody that's dedicated to serving this district and delivering results regardless of the voters and whether or not they've chosen to support me in the past. I'm asking for your support because I hope to continue to serve this district in the way that I have. In 2015, I authored legislation that helped veterans start a small business and gave them greater support. That legislation was written by a Democrat and signed by a Republican. In 2017, I helped expand insurance coverage to children with autism. In 2018, I helped deliver the Reinvestment District program, which is helping with downtown projects and the revitalization of Sioux City in places like the Warrior Hotel and the Expo Center. And this year, I saved single-handedly taxpayers and property taxpayers in this state $5.2 million. These are results that I am hoping to continue delivering to our community, and I would be honored to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both for being here, and thank you both for your willingness to serve our community. We appreciate your time and your service. We will now be taking another short break. When we return, we will be talking to the District 14 candidates. As mentioned before, we will not be talking to the District 5 or District 6 candidates as they are running unopposed. We hope that you will stay tuned and come back to hear from the Republican Robert Henderson and the Democrat Steve Hansen, who are running for the District 14 seat. So thank you both, and good luck in the elections.